So without further ado, we'll move on to our first speaker, Duane. Duane Hamacher is associate professor at the University of Melbourne, and Duane, if you can hear me, I'm going to let you introduce yourself so I can give you the floor. And thank you for your patience.
That'd be great. Thank you. Am I able to share my screen? Or I can just talk without anything else?
No, I think you should be able to share your screen.
I just want to double check. All right. We'll give this a go. Can you see it?
Yes, looks great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here speaking with you. It's evening time here in Melbourne, in the southeast corner of Australia. And it's a great time to be talking about this very topic, because it's something that's quite pertinent to everything we're doing down here in Australia. And of course, it's great to do this event for Clive. Clive Ruggles and I have known each other for a number of years, but I remember 20-odd years ago, 25 years ago, when I was a wee student getting fascinated with this topic. Of course, Clive was even then the primary person in this field, and it's great to have these connections over the years and to be able to learn from Clive and collaborate as we go through this exciting area of work. So I titled my talk, Whitening the Sky, Indigenous Astronomy, Light Pollution, and the Erasure of Culture. And for about the next 10, 12 minutes, I'm just going to give a little bit of a run through of some Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander content related to the stars, and in particular, parts of the sky that we can't see very well in any sort of urban area, things that you need dark skies to see. But when we do this, I think it's really important that we touch a couple of quick bases. Why is this so important? Why does it matter? Indigenous people in Australia and around the world and humans across the world have always used the sky and the stars. The sky serves a multitude of functions. It can serve as a map. It can serve as a timepiece, as a law book, as a scientific textbook, as a memory space. It is what many elders around the world, including here on the left, Professor Annette Lee, who's a Lakota woman, artist, and astrophysicist, she and all other elders talk about as is above, so is below, how the land is reflected in the sky. And you see how these two worlds, the landscape and the skyscape, mirror each other. And you see why they're so important when you begin to break things down. But it sounds a little bit esoteric, and could be a little bit, but the main function to think of here is that it serves a very pragmatic purpose. And that's something I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next few minutes. But tied in with that idea of the land being reflected on the sky is another important theme that comes through in all this work, whether in Australia or anywhere around the world. It's the idea that your ability to thrive and survive depends on your ability to read the stars. Sorry about that. So reading the stars, what does that mean? Reading the stars refers to your ability to observe and interpret all of the changes in the positions and properties of celestial objects, no matter how subtle. And that means being able to look at the stars, at constellations, the sun, moon, planets, everything you can see in the sky. And of course, the terrestrial sky, our clouds and local atmosphere can't really be separated from the stars. In Indigenous context, it's all sky country. But it's about how you look at changes in the properties and positions of those objects that can tell you something really important. So what I'd like to start off with is a very famous example from here in Australia, and that's something that different Aboriginal communities across the country share. It's the view of the celestial emu. So in Australia, we have Aboriginal cultures, of which there are over 300 distinct languages spread across the continent, as well as the Torres Strait Islanders, who are an islander Melanesian people who live in an archipelago of islands between Queenstown and Papua New Guinea. And they're both the primary indigenous cultures of Australia. And each of them have their own languages, each of them have their own traditions and cultures and meanings. But you do find some remarkable similarities. The celestial emu, which goes by a great many names, is one of those. This is a dark constellation. It's not a constellation traced out by the bright stars, but rather by the dark spaces between the stars, stretching from the Southern Cross coal sack down through the galactic bulge. Now, the position of the celestial emu throughout the year will tell you something really important. It tells you about the behavior of the animal. It tells you about the changing seasons and the weather and climate patterns. It tells you about food economics. It tells you about ceremony. Everything is embedded in those stars. Now, elders in the Uwaliai country of northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, in particular, Uncle Gil R. Michael Anderson, teaches about how the celestial emu will rise in April and May just after sunset. And at this time of the year, you see this dark constellation rising, and the elders say it looks like a female emu, and she's running. The reason that she is running is she is chasing a mate. The mating season, it's the females who literally run down the males. And she chases him, they mate, they build the nests, and she lays her clutches of eggs. A clutch of emu eggs can be 10 to 15 eggs, each one weighing up to half a kilo, in some cases, even a full kilogram. And over the course of that season, of her running around and producing all of these eggs, up to 35 to 40 kilograms of eggs in a season, she does not have the energy to sit on the eggs and incubate them over the next 2 months. So come June and July, even though the Milky Way after sunset is now stretched across the sky, the elders say, well, we're no longer looking at a female emu running. Now it's a male emu and he's sitting on the nest. And during this time, he'll sit on the nest and only move to fend off predators or to turn the eggs about 15 to 20 times a day. Now, this is an important time for Aboriginal people because the early part of this season is when they begin to collect emu eggs, begin to collect emu eggs. And they would do this using two different teams. One would make a sound like an emu using what's called an emu caller, and the other one would swoop in and take 1 or 2 eggs. Only a couple of eggs because you wanted to maintain a sense of sustainability. The incubation period of these eggs is about 2 months. So starting around August, you start getting the chicks hatching. And now the Milky Way is swung around, so it's sort of perpendicular to the horizon. This is now seen as the male emu, and he's getting up off of the nest. He's getting up because the chicks are hatching. And it's his responsibility to care and rear the young. This is also a time of the year when many Aboriginal communities, especially in southeastern Australia, would hold male initiation ceremonies with ceremonial grounds consisting of 2 circles, a larger and a smaller circle connected by a pathway that were oriented towards the Milky Way in the sky. They were seen as a terrestrial reflection of the celestial emu. And this memory space is where the ceremonies were conducted, where the youth would learn and recount all the oral traditions and the knowledges and the songs and dances they're required to know. A little bit later, even though the celestial emu swings around, so it kind of looks like its head and body are on the ground, like it's laying on its back, the elders say, well, now the Milky Way looks a bit more like the bum of an emu as it begins sitting down in water holes. So come October and November, the emus begin sitting in these water holes because the temperatures start rising and they get quite hot. And it's like a celestial Archimedes. As the emu sits in these water holes, he displaces the water, which falls down as seasonal rain, which picks up at that time of the year and peaks around October and November. So we can see these dark spaces between the Milky Way that reflect this terrestrial emu in the sky. It's a celestial emu, has a lot of importance. It's all about food economics, seasonal change, ceremony, timekeeping, animal behavior. If you can't see the Milky Way, none of that is going to work. With elders in the Torres Strait, they told me about a particular time towards the end of the Nege and the end of the dry season, where you get beautiful, still, clear weather. And the sky is crystal clear after sunset. And when you look up, you'll see this strange column of light. It's sort of shaped a little bit like a triangle. It's much wider and brighter towards the bottom, but sort of tapers off as it goes up into the sky. And the elders say around the early to mid part of November, when you look over on the western horizon, you'll see this column of light stretching directly upward into the sky, almost, as they say, to the top of the sky, to zenith. What they're describing, of course, is the zodiacal light, the reflection of interplanetary dust in the solar system. And if you look at that time of the year, because I don't have a photograph of it from the Torres Strait, Of course, we know zodiacal light is going to be hugging the ecliptic. So I can show you in the Torres Strait. So this is from the Torres Strait using stellarium. You can see after sunset, when it finally gets proper dark, you can see that ecliptic going directly up into the sky, directly perpendicular to the horizon. And again, this is the time of the year that you will start to have a few weeks before the coming cookie or the monsoon season begins. So this is a critical time because if people would know, this is when you begin planting sugar and banana and yams, which grow over the wet season. You harvest them in April and May at the end of the wet season before the dry. If you do it too soon or too late, you risk losing your crops and losing your harvest. So it's critically important that you're able to see something as faint as the zodiac light. Because if you can't, it's not merely you get something wrong, so what, who cares? If you get it wrong, you die. And a final one that I wanted to show you, which is a real reflection of the stars in the sky on the land, is the idea of star maps. And this is where you would find a travel route from point A to point B across perhaps several hundred kilometers. You have to figure out where to go. And once you figure out where to go, where to camp, you identify the landscape features and know where the food and the water and medicine is, you have to be able to teach younger generations so they can travel these same routes. And a concept of star maps utilizes the stars as a teaching aid. So that journey across the landscape, where the places you camp are like waypoints on a map, you can use a similar grouping of stars in the sky that have a rough orientation, a rough layout of that terrestrial map. And you teach the younger generations earlier in the year, at night, using the stars as a guide. But later, when you travel, you're not traveling at night following stars. You're traveling during the day. The stars are simply a mnemonic. They're a memory device. They're a way for you to understand where to go and how to get there. This information is encoded in the song, which you sing as you walk across the landscape. And the song will tell you where everything is that you need to go. And curiously, over time, when the Europeans came to Australia and began moving across the country, they followed the same walking trails and they camped at the same places, oftentimes um, assisted by local Aboriginal people. And those walking paths became roads and highways. And those campsites became villages, settlements, towns, and regional cities. And nowadays, you can actually look at Google Maps and see how beautifully they're reflected. It's not a one-to-one map, but it's a great way to show how a vision of the stars can be used as a mnemonic to teach younger generations how to travel incredibly long distances. This distance from Gaduga to Carnarvon Gorge is over 600 kilometers. So you might think, well, so what? Light pollution, is it really that bad? I mean, look here, Australia overall, compared to most countries, doesn't have that bad of light pollution. Well, maybe. You might think, well, does it really affect Aboriginal people that much? Don't they all live out in the outback? Aren't they all out bush? Well, no. You might be surprised to know that the largest population of Aboriginal people in Australia is Western Sydney. You can see how bad light pollution is there. So light pollution, whether it's urbanization or what happens in many parts of Australia, excuse me, is mining and natural resource extraction creates a tremendous amount of light pollution. So when you create light pollution, you begin whitening the sky, you begin erasing those stars. And when you wipe out those stars, it's not simply taking out something that looks kind of pretty. Your entire way of being, your entire culture, your livelihood, the social rules, the time piece, the map, everything you need, the scientific information around you is all encoded in that library of the stars. So you can think of it as a sort of slow violence. And I wrote a paper a few years ago about how light pollution is a form of cultural genocide. Quite a strong statement to make, but light pollution is incredibly damaging. It's not just Indigenous people, but to everyone. But in particular, with these cultures, when you erase the sky, you're burning down the cultural libraries. So thank you so much. I apologize. I've gone a little bit over time.
Thank you, Duane. That was wonderful. Really appreciate that.